Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Whatataka toho ki te uru, whakataka toho ki te tonga. Kia makina ki uta, kia makina ki tai. E he aka ana kia atatura, he teo, he huka, he ho, hu, tehi, Māori ora. Kia ora koutou, ko Tim Bamford, toka wingawa e mahi aho kei te papa atawhai. Good morning, my name is Tim, I'm from the Department of Conservation in New Zealand. It is traditional that we introduce ourselves with a proverb and a little bit about ourselves in Te Reo, which is our native language. The proverb that I chose today was about the waka taki timu, which got caught in a storm off the west coast of the South Island in New Zealand. But it survived the storm because it was well prepared and well managed. And I felt like that was an appropriate proverb to bring today, because if we prepare our places well and manage them well, we have a fantastic time and our communities benefit. So similar to the others, I'll just kick off with a little bit of context around Aotearoa, New Zealand, our growth in visitors in the last 10 years, what that's meant for us, and then provide some examples of the tools we have for managing our places and the impacts from visitation, and then go through 3 examples of what that looks like, and then more than happy to take questions through the panel example. Just quickly starting off with the Department of Conservation, we essentially do 2 things. We look after everything that we feel is unique to New Zealand, our cultural heritage, our species and our ecosystems and our habitats. And then importantly, we have a strong mandate in connecting people to them and ensuring that they have a fantastic time. We look after about 1/3 of the country, and so you'll see over here all of the coloured green and yellow and the blue are areas that we look after, and then we have a range of mandates around our species. So essentially the things that attract people to come to New Zealand are generally the places and the species and the experiences that the department supports managing with our local communities and our businesses. We have a range of roles in undertaking that. Firstly, a policy role in ensuring the settings. Secondly, we have a strong regulatory role. You cannot undertake any business activity on public conservation land without a permit, so we issue permits to over 5,000 businesses, and north of 1,000 businesses are tourism-based. We also have a compliance and an enforcement role. We're a service provider. We provide a range of experiences from backcountry huts to managed walks to welcoming people with our rangers at place. And lastly, we're an advocate to ensure that people have a great time when they're in the outdoors. They look after the environment, and importantly, they're well prepared and they manage the risks themselves and the environment around them. Just a few examples of the types of things that the department looks after and that bring tourists here. Really similar to Iceland, between 1996 and pre-COVID, we had a massive boom in visitors. We had, in the mid-90s, around 1.5 million international visitors coming to New Zealand per year, and they were predominantly wanting to go into the backcountry. And we had heaps of space in our infrastructure, and our core and iconic experiences weren't that busy. Rolling forward to just pre-COVID, we had roughly 4 million visitors per year. What they wanted to do had changed significantly. They all wanted to go to the same place, and they wanted to have short experiences in nature, and that resulted in a significant amount of congestion. And we were seeing a range of impacts, predominantly categorized in 4 areas. So one, quite a significant amount of human waste, both rubbish and the other type. Secondly, congestion, so places getting really busy. Thirdly, a lack of preparedness, and this was resulting in a number of injuries and incidences and putting strain on local communities. And fourthly, a lack of cultural awareness, which was resulting in tension with our local communities and our treaty partner, our tribes, what we call our iwi, hapa and whānau, around how people were treating the land that they have manaakitanga for, which is they have the responsibility of stewardship and care. What underpins the department in New Zealand is very similar to Iceland, is that we cannot constrain access, and so we have that similar constitution in terms of freedom of access. Here's 3 examples of classic New Zealand photos. On the bottom here, we've got the road to Milford Sound, the top Tongariro Alpine crossing, and then here's Roy's Peak. This is what they're like most days. So Tongariro crossing, multiple days, we have 3,000 people plus a year. Milford Sound, this is the road to Milford Sound. You can't really see on that clock down there, but often people are waiting an hour and a half to 3 hours to get through this one-way tunnel to then go to Milford Sound. And then we have Roy's Peak, which it's common to wait 45 minutes for that photo that you see over here. We closed the borders during COVID, but things are coming back pretty quickly. So post-COVID, we were running around 4 million visitors, and tourism was both the biggest GDP earner and our biggest employer, and it's now coming back quickly to about 85-90% of levels of pre-COVID, and we're expecting to be past 100% following this summer. I talked about those 4 challenges that we have before. Kind of in addition to that, we are seeing significant impacts from increased storms from climate change. The majority of places that people want to go to when they come to New Zealand is in the alpine environment or in the coastal environment, which is where climate change is impacting us the most. Secondly, we have a large and aging network of experiences that we can't provide for because we've essentially, for a range of reasons over time, brought too many huts and tracks, and now we don't have enough money to look after them, which means we've got a number of impacts on the levels of maintenance and service of those huts, which impact the visitor safety and then also the experience. Another example is on climate change. In the last 5 years, our reactive budget for managing the impacts on huts and tracks has been roughly $7 million per year. In the 5 years previous to that, it was $800,000 a year. And if you take the last 2 years, the average of the last 2 years is $12 million a year. And so that is going to increase. The reason why I mention that is the places where we are seeing these impacts are the places that are the foundation of the tourism experience in New Zealand. And if we don't quickly respond to it, then visitors are not going to have the experience that they have paid for and planned for. And importantly, the communities are not going to have the economy that they are reliant on. But on the other hand, it is a bit idiotic to be continuing to be throwing money at these rebuilds and these experiences when we know that there is a high probability of that asset and that experience not lasting. So, how do we deal with this? It's a very complicated slide, but it essentially says we've got a spectrum of interventions that we can do as a department. Firstly, we do nothing. And then right at the far end, we put significant numbers of restrictions on where we are able to as a department. And so in some unique scenic areas, we are allowed to limit the number of people that go there or completely restrict access. But that is only available to us in a small number of places. right in the middle is essentially good communication, our use of infrastructure, how we close and open infrastructure, and then also our restriction methods and how we work with businesses. Traditionally, as a department, the kind of biggest tool that we have used over the last decade has been our infrastructure. And so where we've felt that there is an issue, we've built a larger track, a larger hut, a bigger car park. And generally, if you build it, they will come. Sorry for the blurry photo, but this is Old Aki Mount Cook. We get over 1 million visitors per year. This is the gateway for a number of iconic short walks and day hikes and multi-day hikes. Down the bottom here, we spent $1.5 million building a new car park with facilities that exceeded all of the visitor numbers that had been at the park. I think this was the third weekend that it was open. What you can't see along here is all the cars parked on the side of the road. In a full car park. And this is extremely common. So we've actually realized that the more things you build, it's generally not going to help with the experience. So we've started using infrastructure in a different way. We're starting to transition towards thinking about the flows of people at our popular places. We're turning a number, or have turned a number of our iconic day walks and multi-day hikes into one-way only, which has had a significant impact with people who have been on that. The surveys telling us that they consider on a one-way track their estimate of the number of visitors on that experience is 1/5 of their estimate of visitors on the same track when it is two ways, because of that multi-flow of traffic feeling a lot more congested. Secondly, and we saw a number of examples of this yesterday at Gulfus and others, is making our tracks a little bit longer and providing other experiences for people, which is slowing them down so a place can hold a larger number of people. And we've also been thinking about what are the experiences that people want to have in the range of them in one place. And an example of that is in Franz Glacier on the west coast. We have a popular glacier that receives about 700,000 to 800,000 people per year. The car park is very busy, and it's quite a congested and not very nice experience, but it is really convenient. Drive 15 minutes up the road, park at the car park, walk 100 metres, see an awesome glacier. What we decided to do in consultation with the local community is to, on the other side of the river of the road, build a walking track from the start of the road up the glacier, which takes about 2.5 hours round trip. And when you get to the end of that walking track, you can look across at another angle of the glacier. This track has a higher barrier of entry because a number of people don't want to walk 2.5 hours round trip to see the glacier. But when you walk through this beautiful forest, you see the footprints of the kiwi and you stand out at the glacier, you're in solitude and you're in the experience of Aotearoa. And then we have just across the glacier, out of view of this track, 700,000 people parking their cars, looking at the glacier. Same place, same experience, completely different views and tourists. And so we've found that we can think quite differently about the experiences that we provide and provide a spectrum of them rather than just going to one solution fits all. Just before I get into a few of the specific examples, I thought it would be worth touching on funding. It's quite everywhere where we were yesterday when we did the Golden Circle, the same question came up. Like everyone's got the solutions, but how do we afford to pay for them? We have a similar sort of legislative mandate in New Zealand where we cannot charge for access. So we can charge for a facility or a service at the cost that we provide for that. And we've used that mechanism quite differently over the last couple of years, where on our very iconic multi-day hikes that have a hut, so a facility and a service, we are really ramping up the price to kind of the edge of what we consider is considered reasonable. So for Milford Sound, which is the number one, one of the number one day hikes in New Zealand and one of the number one day hikes in the world, it costs around $200 Kiwi a night, which is about 120 American. And if you want to stay at the Heaphy Great Walk, which is again one of the top day walks in the country but has more capacity, it doesn't have as much demand, it's costing you around $80 Kiwi or sort of $50 American. And then we have a number of experiences that are close by which cost $5 a night to stay in. And so what that's resulting in is people having more of a choice, and we're able to provide for a range of experiences at a different price point. But what we've noticed is for those iconic experiences, pricing essentially doesn't make a difference. If anything, the opposite. The hikes where we've hiked the price up or increased the price, it's selling out even faster because people see the difference between the Heaphy and the Milford and say, oh, there must be a reason why the Milford's 4 times as much. I've got to do the Milford. And so, again, whilst it's a fantastic mechanism for revenue, it's not helping us with our demand management. Secondly, and this is quite unique to New Zealand, but we have just pre-COVID put in an international visitor levy. So you pay every person who's not a New Zealand, Australian or from Singapore, you pay $35 to come into the country. That has just been ramped up to $100 per person. That was raising roughly $80 million a year. It's now going to raise about $220 million a year. Half of that goes to the Ministry of Business, who use that for tourism infrastructure for small rate-paying communities to help them do things like service their toilets, re-gravel their car parks, manage and develop their roads. And it's a competitive fund, and it's been incredibly useful in ensuring that the impacts of congestion and of waste management has been better utilised in small communities that don't have much of a rate base. And we saw a number of examples of that just in the Golden Circle the last couple of days. The other 50% goes to the Department of Conservation, who you can use that for looking after nature in national parks and places that visitors go to, and also managing the visitor experience better. This levy has been an absolute godsend to New Zealand and managing those impacts because it's directly targeted to tourism. It enables us to do things that otherwise we wouldn't have to have been able to do. Something that we are currently working through with Cabinet, which is our legislative decision maker in Parliament, is an access charge for international visitors, where we are proposing for iconic places, we put in place an access charge for people who, again, aren't New Zealanders, Kiwis, or Singaporeans. That's only going to work in some places. We find that the access charging is like really, really geographically constrained. So Milford, you saw the road before, you drive down in one road, you get to the end, it's really easier to put a barrier over the gate like we saw in Susie's presentation and clip the ticket. In a number of other places that we have, you can walk in from anywhere, and so it would be a legislative or an administrative nightmare or burden to charge. And so we're going to be quite targeted and thoughtful about where we put in place an access charge. Lastly, we don't charge for car parks, so it's just something that we've never done on public conservation land, and so we're having a similar conversation to what is happening in Iceland that we were discussing yesterday. So over the summer, we are exploring the introduction of car park charges at 8 iconic places, and then we are going to hypothecate or directly tag that revenue back to the management of those places and those communities. And so that could be through building other experiences like the Fran's example before, or providing for kaitiaki, which is our word of visitor, for visitor ranges at places. Another thing that we are doing is thinking about what is our future network of our visitor experiences. And so right now we can only, the money that we have each year, we can only afford to maintain and replace around 60% of the huts, tracks, roads and toilets, etc. that we have. And so we are running a process with our stakeholders across New Zealand to identify what are the experiences that are really key to our communities for both recreation and for visitation, and getting really, really clear on what is the role of the department, what is the role of business. And so right now, the department manages a range of experiences that in the view of the department, we've accidentally slipped into, we're not good at running it, and businesses are much better placed to do that. And so some examples could be, we run a number of service campgrounds where we have staff managing those campgrounds. We don't need to run commercial campgrounds. There are a number of operators who would love to run a campground and do a better job than us. We also have things like conference centres and golf courses, which we don't need greenskeepers or conference centres managers, and there are businesses that want to take those opportunities off us. And so what we're doing is working with businesses to identify what are the experiences or places they would like to manage, what does success look like, and then providing those opportunities to them. And then thirdly, for the experiences that are left over, making a transition plan for divesting of that asset over time. Okay, on to case studies. So this is another view of Tongariro, that day hike that I was talking about before. It's a dual UNESCO World Heritage Area, so both cultural and natural heritage. And it's one of the top 10 day hikes in the world. Pre-COVID, it had around 150,000 people per year, and on peak days, sort of either side of 3,000 people visiting. Last summer, visitor numbers had returned to about 75 to 80% of pre-COVID levels. And we've been trying to manage this place and provide a better experience for a number of years. But how we've been doing that is by building more infrastructure. And so you can see down here, we're building boardwalks, we're building toilets, and the numbers are just increasing. In 2017, we put car parking restrictions in place, which did have an impact. But then once visitors understood it and got their heads around it, visitor numbers bumped right back up. Obviously, in 2019, COVID hit over our summer. And at that time, Ngāti Hikaaro, which is the local tribe, they came to us. And so in New Zealand, we have our Māori tribes. The government created a range of grievances with those tribes when we settled New Zealand. In the 1980s, we put in place a process to redress those grievances, and so each tribe with the government goes through a treaty settlement process where they settle those grievances and get a range of things from that, whether it's social, cultural, environmental, or economic. Ngāti Hikaaro were about to start their treaty settlement process with the government and said, hey, we're not going to start negotiating with you until you sort out what is happening in Tongariro, because the cultural carrying capacity of this place cannot handle the number of visitors that are on it. And so now is the time. You have a chance with COVID. Let's get around the table and let's sort this out. And so what we did is we brought everyone together, all the main local businesses that run in the area, the local iwi, the local government, and the department, and said, hey, what does this look like collectively? They said it's not, when we think about carrying capacity, like it means something different to everyone, and the environmental carrying capacity of a place is quite subjective. And so let's think about what's the environmental impact of visitors, what's the economic impact of different visitor numbers, what's the social impact of the range of numbers, and then lastly, but most importantly, and you'll see that through the weightings on here, what is the cultural impact to the local tribe of having different numbers of visitors at this place? And that came up with a carrying capacity report, which essentially said between 1,500 and 2,000 people per day should be the kind of absolute maximum. This, ignore those numbers on the left, it's a rolling 5 and 7 day average. When we jumped into those numbers, we realized that kind of most of the year, it was the people visiting were underneath that carrying capacity limit. But then we would have these peaks of congestion that were essentially unmanageable. And so in talking about that, collectively with the business community, Ngāti Hikaro, and the range of government parties, we came up with 2 management objectives. So one was kaitiakitanga, which is guardianship of the land, sea, and sky. So that's essentially ensuring that the place is better off when you leave it than when you found it. Secondly, manaakitanga, which is the concept of showing hospitality, kindness, and respect to visitors. And so in doing that, we thought there's 4 ways you can really lean in and achieve this. 1, shape how people arrive at the destination. Welcome them, get them prepared, send them on their way, excited and informed and orderly. Secondly, give them visibility of the cultural significance. Make them understand why going to particular places is wāhi tapu or sacred and not a good idea. Thirdly, understand the environmental impacts and address the carbon emissions from management. And then thirdly, manage visitor safety with better weather stations, road management and communities. And then lastly, get really clear on the behaviours that we want to see at those places. And so the 3 main things that we've done is firstly, we've implemented a booking system. So you now have to book to go to this place. There is an unlimited number of spots on the booking system, so it's never going to run out. What happens is as soon as the number of people who have booked hits over 1,000 people per day, you start getting a traffic light system that says to you, hey, it's orange, starting to get a little bit busy. You may want to book on another day. At 1,500 people, it says, hey, it's going to get really busy here. You need to be prepared for it to be busy. At 2,000, it's starting to flash red and say, this is going to be one of the busiest days of the year. Would you like to visit this place on that day? What that has resulted in is most people making a decision to go on another day or understand the experience that they're going to have. When we started this, we were pretty sure we were heading down a route where we had to put a hard cap of numbers at that culture and carrying capacity and say, you have a booking system and once you hit 1,500, that's it. Overrunning the pilot the last couple of years, we've come to the conclusion with our business partners, Ngāti Hikaro and government, that we don't need to do that because the booking system and the types of change behaviours that I'll talk about has actually achieved those management objectives of managing the impacts and helping people understand the importance of the place. To help people understand the importance of the place, we've developed kaitiaki rangers, which are enthusiastic young Ngāti Hikaaro people who the department employs for them to welcome with open arms to Tongariro Crossing and give them information on the cultural and spiritual significance of the place and what it means to them as a rangatahi or a young person growing up in that area. The impact of that has been massive. Firstly, people get really connected to that place. And it is, even yesterday, when you hear the story, the Icelandic history of these places, you connect to them, and when you're connected to something, you want to care for them. Secondly, it's created an employment pathway in a very rural area for Ngāti Hikaaro, which can't be underestimated. And as part of that, we are starting to build some infrastructure that welcomes people, that reflects the cultural significance of the place. Another example, and I'll go a bit quicker, but is Cathedral Cove. This is a very, very popular destination in the Coromandel in the North Island of New Zealand. It takes about 25 minutes to walk there, or you can take a boat. The road to the walking track of Cathedral Cove is at the end of a quiet residential neighbourhood, and people never used to visit this place. Over the last 10 years, we're getting around 250,000 to 500,000 visitors trying to park in a residential neighbourhood. A year ago, we had a quite significant storm where you can see the impacts in these two photos, which is cut off walking access to the track. There's quite a lot of geotech and engineering needed to re-stabilise and build the walking access. So we thought we'll take this opportunity to think about how do we manage this place better. And so again, learning off our experience in Tongariro, we pulled together businesses, local iwi, and local government. What this has resulted on is, again, a number of quite soft levers or management decisions that are starting to result in a significant difference in how that place is managed. Firstly, we've cut off with the local government access to that residential road, and we've created a car park close by, and we are running shuttles, or the local businesses are running shuttles from that car park to the start of the track. And so you can still drop residential cars off, but there's no parking and there's no bus or van access. We've collectively agreed that to experience this place and walk around and really sit in the wonder of it, an hour is generally enough. And so with businesses, we are telling everyone, spend an hour there. You don't need to spend the day. And so people now are generally spending 1 hour, which is meaning the turnover is a lot quicker. And so when people are there, we've got the same number of visitors over the day, but it feels a lot less busy. The gem of Aotearoa, Pio Tahi, Milford Sound. This place is pretty special. We have around 1 million visitors there a year. It is generally acknowledged that it's not well managed. And like we heard earlier today, you can go back to documents in the 60s and the 70s which say we need to manage this place better. So again, we pulled together a collaborative group of relevant parties to think about how do we manage this place. And they've come up with a range of recommendations that are starting to be implemented. Secondly, they've said, hey, for some of these places that are incredibly unique, we need to be charging for them. And so we are starting to, as I say, put in place an international access charge. Secondly, let's improve the visitor experience. Currently, people drive down this road and park at a shoddy car park. with infrastructure that was put in place in the 60s and the 70s when 50 to 60,000 people were visiting there. Let's build tracks on the way, biking experiences, let's slow people down and so they have a fantastic time. Let's build accommodation halfway down the road so people stay overnight. And then thirdly, rather than self-driving, let's create experience hubs in Te Anau, which is the local town. So people stop there, they park, they jump on the bus, and they go into Milford Sound, Pio Tahi, with an understanding of the place through the interpretation of the guide. And that results in the last one around better management of visitor flows, uses of buses, coaches, and better parking to try and reduce that congestion at Homer Tunnel, which you saw before. So it's a quick run through for me. Thank you very much. It's been a phenomenal time and really appreciate the hospitality or the manaakitanga that we've been shown, and we'll be here the next day or two and more than happy to have a chat about any of the examples that I've talked about, because I do feel there are a lot of similarities between Iceland and New Zealand. So have a great day today and thanks again for the opportunity.